Now, if you've listened regularly or at any stage over the last 18 months, you might have heard me go on about the unholy mess in Fines Victoria. I've been frustrated. Not a lot of people have picked this up in the media. Channel 9 ran a little on it. But I could tell that it was just damaging lives. The mess in Fines Victoria was so significant that people were losing their licence when they shouldn't, not losing their licence when they should. I mean, that's the ultimate. You could have people on the road who shouldn't be and off the road who should be. There were also people being harassed, people trying to pay bills and not being able to, and the amount of the fine going up significantly when they didn't even know about it because it hadn't been paid. It was a mess. They admitted to me well over a year ago that it was a mess caused by a computer system and they were trying to get on top of it. I think in the end it even led to the resignation of the sheriff or departure of the sheriff. The Victorian Ombudsman, while I was on leave, brought down a report on this, essentially supporting or agreeing with what we've been rattling on about for so long. However, she did it more scientifically, looking at it as an ombudsman would. She's in the studio with me if you'd like. If you've still got problems with Fines Victoria, 96900 693 13 13 32. Birth, deaths and marriages is another target. It's a bureaucratic meltdown. Deborah Glass, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
One of the things that concerned me most about this, and there's a line on page 1 of your report, it was quickly clear the cause of many of the complaints had still not been fully rectified. Had the problems at Fines Victoria yet been fixed?
Not yet. What they've, I'm afraid to say, and look, they've been pretty candid with us about their failings. They've told us, and I know this date keeps being pushed back, that they're not going to be fully functional until at the end of June at least. So I anticipate we will be getting more complaints. You know, it is not over yet.
Why? Why is it that hard?
Well, I'm not an IT expert, so I can't answer that question, but it started, their problem started when they went live with a system that wasn't fully functional. And it's although they have put over $16 million into fixing it in the last year, there's still a legacy that we will see, I think, for some time.
The original budget, I think, was 3 or 4 million. I think the last figure we had, you're right about 16, I think it's over 20 now.
Well, they've certainly put a lot of money, a lot of resource into fixing it, which they needed to do, and that's what I'm waiting to see, the signs of improvement. Well,
what has it done to people? What has the damage been?
Look, I've got no doubt that this has affected people's lives, and one of the reasons that this is such an important story, I think, is the human impact it has. I mean, the level of distress when a father is being chased for fines caused by his dead son, for example. The anxiety that people feel when, first of all, they're challenging an infringement and they can't get through, so they don't know whether the bailiffs are about to turn up and seize their goods and chattels, So we know, because people have told us, just how much anxiety and stress this has caused.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. It's very distressing. You don't deal with... the average person doesn't deal with the system very often, and they're dealing with the system being told, well, hang on, are they after me?
Yes, well, yeah. and because there have been so many delays in getting through, people, that's compounded the problem. Now, what we're being told is that the additional resources they put in have helped that. There are now fewer delays in getting through.
They told me that a year ago.
Well, it has taken some time.
Okay, but are you confident it'll be fully functional by the end of June as they promised?
No, I'm not, which is why I've put this report out and made it really clear that I'm keeping this under review. So I am monitoring this. We are still getting complaints about Fines Victoria. I've no doubt you're still getting complaints about Fines Victoria. What we're getting, and it's it's only been just over a week since I put this report out, the complaints we're still getting are more sort of legacy issues, things that happened last year that haven't yet been resolved.
They did admit to me that a number of people had lost their licence who should not have lost their licence. Are you able to quantify that?
Well, look, we know that there are over 300 cases where licences were wrongly suspended. Only one of them has been the subject of a complaint. So, and we've talked to them about, how can you actually make sure you rectify this? What they've told us is they're doing everything they can to identify and fix those issues, but some of them they simply won't know until the person becomes aware of it themselves and then can make a complaint.
And so there are people who shouldn't have lost their licence who did, and people who should have lost their licence and didn't.
I'm quite sure that's the case, yes.
if you lose your licence, rightly or wrongly, you can then lose your job. There are people who rely on their licence to have their job. If a person has wrongly lost their licence and lost their job, surely they've got a case for compensation.
I think they do. And Fines Victoria have made it very clear that they will deal with these cases on their merits. And I think if somebody does have a clear case where they've wrongly lost their licence and suffered as a result, that's something that they should be going for.
I guess the other difficulty is to establish that how do you know whether you wrongly lost your licence?
Well, if for example, you've nominated another driver because it wasn't you driving the car and the demerit points have accrued to you, wrongly, and you've lost your licence as a result, well, that's pretty clear.
Well, yeah, that's true. And what about the fines that they were pursuing from dead people? And we talked to several people who were caught in the middle of that. That has been addressed. That won't happen any further.
Well, I'm not going to speak on behalf of Fines Victoria. What they're telling us is that shouldn't happen again. That they should be an automated system where they're notified of death, so that doesn't happen. And you can kind of forgive them the first time for getting it wrong. But what I find unconscionable is where enforcement letters are being chased. Multiple times, and we've certainly seen instances of that in the last year.
Are they answering the phones quickly now?
Well, they now say that they are. Well, I'm sure your listeners will judge that for themselves.
If you've been dealing with Fines Victoria, have a continuing problem, give us a call, 96900 693 13 13 32. I just shake my head at it. It's cost millions and millions of dollars and arguably over 20 million in public money, at least 16 million. It has screwed lives around. It's going to lead to compensation, extraordinary angst. Who's accountable?
Well, this is a complicated question. This is, it obviously comes in the Attorney General's portfolio, but this goes back over at least 10 years. So it probably brings quite a few different governments into the frame here. I mean, the whole issue of fines reform goes back well over a decade. And if you followed the fines reform process, I mean, the objectives of the reform have been actually pretty laudable. They're necessary. The purpose of this was greater efficiency, bring things into one place, and also to implement some really important recommendations, including from the Royal Commission into Family Violence. So I'm not going to criticise the fines reform process. I think that's had very strong bipartisan support. We did ask the question, when I put this report together, why did it start? If you knew the IT system wasn't functioning, why didn't you delay? And we put that question. In fact, the answer we got was that they were given, the department provided, the specialist and technical advice that it would be good enough, that it would work, and also that there was a risk in continuing, a great risk, a financial risk in continuing with the old supplier. So what they're basically saying to us is that they were caught between a rock and a hard place.
But then they proceeded to tell us, and I think you as well, that it'll all be fixed in 2 months, 3 months, and just kept blowing out and out. And I think the first estimate we had was at least a year ago it was going to be fixed.
Yeah.
And they just kept getting that wrong.
They did. And look, I'm not an IT expert, so I'm, why do they get it wrong? Well, they're taking expert advice that is wrong.
Okay, and the accountability, maybe this is why there isn't a lot of political heat around this. Maybe the other side of politics is culpable as well. You see, this first came to us from a whistleblower. And you sort of wonder whether if a whistleblower, I suppose eventually people would start raising it, but if the whistleblower hadn't come forward, whether we'd even know this much.
Well, in my case, it wasn't whistleblowers. It was a lot of people making complaints that triggered my attention here.
We did urge them to do that.
Well, that's great. And that's what complaints do. I mean, complaints are a trigger for improvement. I mean, I tell agencies all the time, complaints are free feedback. They're a really good way of finding out how your service is operating, and you need to listen to complainants.
We'll take some calls for the Ombudsman in a moment, 96900 693 or 13 13 32. Fines Victoria, birth, deaths and marriages we'll get to as well. This is a report of complaints, not a full investigation of costs, etc. Do you move to a full investigation or not?
Look, I don't rule anything out. I mean, what I want to see is improvement. And that's what really matters here. We've seen some really appalling instances of the way people have suffered as a result of the human impact of these bureaucratic failings. And what you really want is for that to not happen again. So what I'm looking at with these things is what will it take? Now, Fines Victoria have been very candid with me about their failings. They've been very open about what they need to do. They put a lot of money into fixing it. Now, if all of that works, then I don't need to go back to it.
In private enterprise, heads would roll.
I'm not so sure about that.
Really? If you're running a business that you blew $20 million on something that screwed around endless numbers of your customers, you'd be looking for a new job.
Well, maybe and maybe not. And look, I am in. We can get into a debate on that one. And look, there's certainly been many cases I've been involved in. I've investigated where I felt very strongly that heads should roll, and I've never been very shy about about those. And generally, when I've recommended it, they have happened. This isn't the kind of case yet where it feels like a head-rolling scenario. This is a fix-it scenario, and heads that have rolled can't fix things.
I think the sheriff did leave or did retire.
Well,
might have been coincidence.
That I can't say. I mean, there certainly have been some departures.
We'll take a break. Calls for a moment for the Ombudsman.
Money News.